on to our Q&A session now. We've got about 20 minutes, I think, for Q&A. So we had Delia Porter from Business Clan speaking to us first thing about what you need to know about GDPR. Paul Hudson from IQ and IT, which is about the IT and protection, making sure that you're compliant there. Patrick Stewart from TWM has just spoken to us about the legal side of it. And we've now been joined by Emma Levy from Figment Agency. Emma is our marketing strategist heading up Figment's specialist digital marketing areas, including the SEO and social media. Emma has been with Figment since 2013. She has a BA in marketing and management and a pre-Figment career spanning 8 years in higher education marketing. She's your marketing person, if you're not marketing. So what we're going to do is, if you have a question, if you can please put your hand up. We will use the microphone. Amanda, can you run around the microphone for us and we'll take it in turn. Our panel hopefully will be able to speak loudly enough for you to hear them. So it's on. So I think Sue here is the first question.
Lovely. You've spoken a lot about cyber security. What about paper records? Is there any mention of what we should be doing? We've got loads of them.
I'll answer one thing on that.
Okay.
I think that's like a sort of that is kind of like that physical security audit. I mean, you know, we're talking very digitally, but like I said, I think earlier on, you know, we've got people that will print out stuff and then put it in their case and go out for that, you know, beer on a Friday and leave it on a train or something like that. So you do have to sort of, when you're doing these, when you're looking at your organisation and where everything goes from a practical point of view, you know, if it's going to a printer or something like that, and what happens and what can be printed out and what things you're putting in place to protect that, then that's part of your kind of risk assessment or your threat model, if you see what I mean. So we're doing it for
storage. We literally have a garage and a scout hut full of records.
Yeah, so I would say something like that, a physical security audit, because cybersecurity does go into that physical security audit, that, you know, you'd have to probably, you know, I would mitigate that by someone signing it off. You know, actually looking at where are you physically storing those records and how hard is it? Because security is like lockpicking. You know, there's actual penetration testers that will go into a site and think, right, I know that, you know, I know this person has card RFID access, for example, those swipe cards. So I know on Facebook that they're going to this cafe quite a bit. So I walk past them, I then swipe their RFID, get their card, wait till 6 o'clock, they're all gone. I go into their office, I'm met with a lock. That's fine, I've got through the first day, now I can pick that. How much security is around that, you know, and you've got to judge that, I think, from what are you protecting again? How important are those records, health records and things like that. So that my strategy for that would be for getting a physical security audit actually looked at by someone.
Did you have something to add?
Can I add something? Are you able to turn any of that into digital records?
They're held digitally as well. These are prime records, accounting records, which you have to keep. Most of them where clients won't take them back. They're the ones with the paperless.
And you have to keep them as
We've got to keep
paper
for 7
records.
years.
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. I was going to say keep it as a digital record on an encrypted drive.
No, there's
Okay.
too much, that amount of storage for our number of
You know,
clients.
for something like that, you definitely have to get like someone to almost, you mitigate your risk by like a document. If you're sending out, you could mitigate that by handing it to this gentleman here to sign off, because then you could sue him potentially if he got it wrong, you know. So same sort of thing with a physical security audit, because it might be that, you know, staff getting that. It's not always externals. It's not always like the robber with the black and white shirt. It's often internal people that can create the breach. You know?
Okay. Yep. You had a question there? I've been there.
Hi, if the our employees send emails about clients to each other, do we need to notify the clients that they're doing that?
Sorry, I'll rephrase the question. It's a two-part question. The first part is, some employers tend to record or track the employee emails. Do clients need to be informed about that? That the incoming emails are being stored somewhere or recorded somewhere? the sent emails, are we allowed to keep a record of the employees' emails going out somewhere?
Okay. Shall I take that one?
Yes, please.
So a lot of that is to do with transparency. So from an employee point of view, you need to make sure that your HR policies and procedures are in place so that employees know what is happening. Basically, nobody wants a surprise, okay? From a client's point of view, you will have a contract with your client. You need to make it clear in your contract what you're doing with their data. And there will need to be a clause in there, which I'm sure Patrick will be able to help with, to say that you comply with data privacy regulations, GDPR, data protection bill when it comes through.
The lady behind there.
Hi, my name's Annie. I'm a photographer, and there's a big debate whether images are actually data or not.
So with that, with image recognition, you can potentially identify a person just from a photograph. Therefore, what you need to be careful about is how you're using those images, where you're going to place them, and make sure you've got the rights, the consents from your clients or whoever, in terms of what you're going to do with those images.
Usually, if I put them online, I actually have consent. However, sometimes I send something off to a retoucher in the States, or the image goes to a lab where it has to be developed. So that's
So when you're transmitting that information, this is probably an IQ and IT thing, but you don't really want to send that information via email because it's very hackable. You want to have maybe some sort of portal so you can go directly in there, put it into that portal, and your subcontractor or supplier can then access it that way.
So just their privacy policy, I've got to make sure I'm aware of.
Yeah, and you've got to do your due diligence on your suppliers to make sure that they're GDPR compliant.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. Bill,
Bill Vickery, V3 Print. Regarding email traffic generally and the website, what legal wording do we need to post onto either of them or one of them regarding GDPR? We have a privacy statement already.
Yes.
But,
you will need you'll need a privacy statement, whichever, which is GDPR compliant. Will have all the information that's required on that. So that's
and the
no. You would refer to the. I was just referring to the privacy statement on the email, but you would need to record all the information on the email itself.
there was somebody beside, I think. Sorry, there's a lady there.
Hi, I'm Phoenix from bluebubble.tech. I have a question for Delia. I have a couple of clients who have got the so-called lead magnets, right? Or for example, on their website, they have a 5-day challenge that you then need to opt into and give your email address. Now, often these things are described as get your free report, get your free checklist, or opt in for a free challenge. How would you advise us to reword that so they can still do this? Do we just take out the word free?
Okay, so if it's a sort of 5-day thing, then part of that process is that you're going to remind them to go there the next day. So long as you have got a notice that this is what's going to happen, so the expectation of the person coming to your website, it's very clear to them what's going to happen, and that's why they're giving you their information, then that's fine. But if you've got something where you're saying, right, access this free report, and we've put you on our mailing list, that is not okay under GDPR.
So you can still do lead magnets to say, get this report in exchange for your email address, or you can still say this is a free report unless you...
I think you've got to be careful how you word it, but if you were doing a 5-day type thing where they get one piece of information one day, something the next day, etc., then you've actually got 5 opportunities to get their consent to go onto a different list. So a lot of this is all about how you manage your different lists. So you've got a specific list with a very clear purpose as to what you're using it for, and making it clear to the user as to what that's being used for. So if you've got 5 days, you can email them on each of those days. You're keeping that information for that purpose. After that, unless they've consented to be on your mailing list, you've got to get rid of it. Or not get rid of it, you can't use it to market them for the next thing.
So
You would have to.
it can still be called free, provided that in the sign-up you've got a list of what you're going to do.
In that 5-day example, I would say yes. But if it was just a get this report free, and you've not told them, well, and you say, and by doing this, we're going to put you on your list, then you could say that that's not clear and unambiguous consent. So either you need to take off that word free, because actually it's not free, you've got to give something away, your private data, in order to get that report, or you've got to get the consent.
Great, thank you.
Would you back me up on that?
Lady over here.
Yes, I think it's a question of expectations, isn't it? You raise the expectations as to what you're going to use their data for. So if you want to use it beyond that, you've got to go back to them.
When they sign up for something free like that, so they know that that's what they're doing. If they're going to be put on the list, people are not stupid. They know that there's a cost for it, and that is their email address or their name.
It's always that one person, isn't it? It's always that one person.
Yeah. If you get an objection, then if you take them off your list immediately, you probably won't have a problem. So it all comes down to risk management. So if you want to take that risk, then that's up to you. But you basically you don't want to get complaints.
But you still want to balance making money.
Yeah.
And then if you don't get people on the list, you're not going to make so much money. So where do you go?
It's like taking out insurance, and you can avoid taking out insurance on the basis that that will not ever happen to you. If it does, then you have to suffer the consequences. It is risk management, as Delia says, but within GDPR, what GDPR is saying is you need to be transparent and open about the way that you are using people's data one way or the
But
other.
if you're up front, when they sign up for it, when they send you like an offers that might be of interest in this particular area, when you sign up, then what is the problem with that?
Well, if you're satisfied that they have given your consent to that, then that is fine. If it goes beyond that, where they've given their consent for a specific purpose, if you're going to use it for something else, then to my mind, that would say you have to get re-consent for that next purpose. You can't just assume because you've got consent for one thing, you've got consent for all.
In an ideal world, you would get a separate consent for the special offers, because you're not supposed to bundle together consent. So you should get consent for each area that you want to contact them for.
The consent, if you don't tell them you've got that special offer going on then?
You could apply an additional checkbox saying, we would also like to stay in contact with you about additional special offers. Please tick this box if you'd like to receive that information.
That's why list management's quite important. Or very important.
Yeah, my name's Claudia. I've got a question for either Paul Hudson or Delia Porter. I just want to know if you are aware of a large organisation who you believe are in breach, is the first port of call to contact them?
Yes.
Rather than the ICO?
Yes. The ICO is going to be very busy, and
Yeah.
They will not look at anything unless you've approached that company first.
And they haven't put it right?
Yes.
And
yeah.
for
And
example, I
companies
have
companies have a legal obligation to handle those complaints.
within a set period, like currently, or would you wait until it's
I don't think there's a set period, but it does say promptly or words to that effect in there. And so the only other thing is that if you can't reach some sort of agreement, so when you lodge that complaint with that company, they must inform you that if you don't get a satisfactory answer, that you've got the right to go to the ICO and that you've got the right to a judicial remedy. So, but you've got to go through that process first to try and sort it out between the company and
Failure to self-regulate, to self-remedy the problem would be a matter to be taken into account if the fine is being imposed. To what extent the company has cooperated and seek to deal with that. But it does impose a sort of a need on the company itself to sort it out, because otherwise the fine they may be subject to could be higher just because they haven't self-regulated it.
Thank you.
James, over there.
My question is like, to get consent from the prospective client, we need to communicate first. So how do I communicate like without getting consent? Sometimes like, we have to communicate and, the convert like prospective client. So sometimes company use like, the paid and unpaid database to get the information and send them email or phone and then get consent. But my question is, to communicate them, if we need consent first, so how do we do that?
Are you a business to consumer or business to business?
Business to business.
Okay, so if you meet somebody at this event today, there would be a reasonable expectation from that other person that you might contact them if you've had a conversation with them about something, particularly if you've exchanged business cards. You've then got a legitimate reason to contact them to follow up that conversation. At that point, you should then point out to them that you have, say, an email newsletter or whatever, and see if they would like to sign up to it, and they can then provide their consent that way.
Suppose if I use like, the L.com or other paid or unpaid database, so can I do that or?
If it's to an info@ type email address, so not a named person, then yes, you can. But if it's to a named person and they're personally identifiable, then no.
Thank you.
So what about data that you buy from companies' house?
Hi, my name's Lisa. For bloggers and influencers, obviously data and people's data is their reason for being. What's the process now for them for capturing data? Obviously, for bloggers that send out regular newsletters, how does that work? Do they need to get informed consent each time they send a newsletter out? Because obviously we're covering different topics. Or do they have that data on their database and people opt in with the usual process, basically, or the new process?
They really should have explicitly opted into the newsletter. So if it's a regular newsletter that's going out, then you should have had them explicitly opt in at some point. If it's the case that they haven't previously opted in, then you would need to ask them to re-opt into that database, because the use of opt-out boxes has now essentially been outlawed. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
It's a good time to clean your database, basically. So if you haven't had any correspondence, communication with somebody on your list for, let's say, 5 years, it's somewhat arbitrary, but then probably there's not a lot of point in having them on your database. If you know that they've been reading your email newsletter in the last 6 months, keep them on there. But what I would do is probably to have one list where you've got sort of pre-GDPR, sort of implied consent, and have a new list where you can clearly show that you've got opt-in consent. And then just go through and periodically clean that old list out so that people who haven't been in communication drop off. So that's where you need to think about your retention policies.
It's quite straightforward to set that up through the majority of email client software. So for example, I use Campaign Monitor, and you can create a subscription link or a subscription landing page to get people to resubscribe to your list. So that's the best way to go about it.
Is it still okay to have the newsletter bar? So if people want to subscribe to your newsletter, that's them opting in, isn't it?
That's them opting in. It's good practice to use the double opt-in.
Thank you.
I think it was a lady in the back on the left, right left there, with a hand. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Claire Edwards, Elder Care Consultant. I think it's probably links in quite well with the previous question, which is, does consent have an expiry date to it? So is there a period during which you have to go back and regain consent?
There is no defined period, but it's all about, that's to do with your retention policy. So if nobody has responded to you, you've got to decide what that period is, and it will depend on what your type of business is as to how long that period may be. But if they've not responded in, let's say, 7 years, then definitely they should not be on your list.
What is the nature of the consent? What is the nature of the processing that you're seeking the consent to? Is it marketing or how you're dealing with your...
Well, there would be two, actually. Obviously, I've got clients whose sensitive data I hold, who I provide a service to, and I would go back to them, I would imagine, at least annually. I would be maintaining contact through the year. So that's more easy for me to define.
And remember, those consents have to be the specific and unambiguous, and that's the specific sort of covers the cut-off date, because once the purpose of that consent has disappeared, then that consent will fall away. But it's very sensible to re-engage every on a regular basis, and your policy would provide for that period.
Yeah, and then obviously I've got a list of people whose services will either be of interest to my business or to my clients.
Yeah.
So it was, how often do I need to go back to get consent with that list of people?
Yeah, I mean, if they're people who are trying to sell to you, they're probably going to opt in all the time, aren't they?
The other thing is, if you've got data and you're holding it under a different legal basis, as in it's client data and it's contractual, then you need to make sure that your commercial contracts make it clear how long you're going to hold that data for. So you might not have done any work with that client for, say, 2 or 3 years. You should have a policy as to when you're not going to hold their data any longer.
Okay, time for 2 more questions. I think there's a one here. This lady just put her hand up here.
Thank you. I'm Linda from DataBack, as most people know. This is a strange one because probably most of them are. We send out statements to all of our customers with their chasing their money once a month. Some go to their accounts departments, some go to info@, some go to a name at. And I do think that maybe this is a time to update your terms and conditions and send it to everybody. But however, do you have to ask those people with their name if you can carry on sending them statements and invoices by email?
Well, you've got a contractual basis for sending them that information, but with a lot of accounting systems these days, you will have a client portal, and the way that they are going to become compliant with GDPR is to enable people to go into that portal to access those statements and invoices. So in effect, what you might do is send them an email that you have got a statement waiting, but you wouldn't have any additional personal information.
I get that, because we send to quite a lot of our customers portals. However, we don't have a portal, so we're sending it just by email.
That's fine.
Don't have to do anything.
Well, you do. You have to deal with them as a customer, but you have a contractual right to process that information. It's one of the data protection processing entitlements.
That lady there, the gentleman with brown jumpers pleading with you to ask this question, the very last one. So,
hi, I'm Vicky from Outset. We're a local printing company. It's a question on security, actually. So. Probably aimed at you, Paul. With all our highly complex passwords that we have, and I think probably for my business I've probably got, I don't know, 35 different passwords. I can't retain them all in my little brain. So I use like a secure password protected app called eWallet is the one I use. Is that something that you would recommend? Is that an additional risk? If that's an additional risk, how can you maintain these and have them secure?
Yeah, I mean, again, it does come down to threat modelling again. So, like, if you're like really high security, you may not use one that's web accessible, because again, if you think you're secure, that's the wrong mindset. You have to understand that nothing is secure. You know, you don't want to take it to that fear point, But password managers are great for businesses. I mean, I mentioned LastPass. I personally haven't heard of that particular one. I mean, it doesn't mean it's not good and fine. LastPass is particularly good from our point of view because we can set policies on users within that. You know, so we can force things like two-factor authentication, which means that, you know, you go to use your password manager and you have another factor to get into it. So you're on the right track, you know, because you can even share passwords with people and sort of retract them. So it's a great mindset to be in. You just have to make sure that configuration is correct. So things like, you know, two-factor, things like that. But, you know, do a bit of diligence on the one you pick because, you know, Android are a bit more, that marketplace is a bit more loose and free. So you often get applications on there that tout things, but are often spyware, you know, or able to be breached. So it's, you know, it's hard to sort of guess. So if there was like really, really important data, you'd never have it kind of internet connected. But probably doubtful anyone in this room is going to have that sort of requirement. So as a rule, I mean, we use for really, really sensitive stuff. It's not on some of our password managers. You know, we have different, and we have hardware tokens and things like that. But for you, using a password manager, that is a great way. Just go in and check those settings. You know, do a bit more diligence on which one you pick, which one you're happy with. I think we use LastPass. I think, Emma, you use, what one do you use?
We use 1Password.
Well, yeah, which is, you know, another one.
And we use Dashlane.
And Dashlane's, you know, Dashlane, I know, yeah.
So that generates the password, but it also
stores it.
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
The good thing about 1Password is that it's compatible with iPhone and you can open it with your fingerprint. You can open it with your fingerprint. What? Sorry, 1Password.
Dashlane's the same.
If you want to, if you ever buy our office, pop in and I'll give you a demonstration of LastPass. And it's very simple, and then you can go away and check out Dashlane and all the others as well. But I could show you and make sure you know you put two-factor and stuff like that.
Hi, my name is Daniel. It's also an IT question. I'm a mortgage advisor, so I hold quite a lot of data on people, significant amounts of data, and we also use cloud storage systems. So I recently changed onto a supposedly more secure cloud system than your OneDrives and iCloud. But how secure do you think those really are? And the second question, if I could just add this as well, is how do you protect yourself against the claim of a data breach that could have been you, might not have been you, but there is reason you hold the relevant information. So if a client of mine has banking passwords stolen, etc., a client could assume I've got all the relevant details, it could have been me. So how do you log and how do you know you've had a breach? How do you log it and how do you defend against the claim?
Yeah. There's not a simple answer really. I'll try and give you something as concise as I can. Again, first and foremost, it comes down to threat modelling, right? So we'd have to look at what sort of data are you holding and how might it be, got at. So, for example, we've actually, for one of our clients, we have a client that has some very sensitive data that probably has active people hunting for that information. So we've built out our own isolated version of a storage system, which is all protected and VPN'd and logged and managed, because you can't really attain true security unless you can have complete overview of everything. You know, I mean, if we go really kind of crazy for a minute and like TV style, you know, a lot of people argue about Office 365 and how secure it is. There's a lot of secure good stuff in it, but if I was like a government, you know, it's probably less secure because you don't have access to the data centers. And China, for example, probably has loads of resource and time where they put people in to get to the data centers. So you could argue if they haven't got all of that control and logging and ability to actually see if a breach has happened, how you log it, you know, it's not really secure. So I would say, you know, you have to get someone to independently, without bias, assess the software you're using. You know, that's often where a penetration tester might come in and say, these are the points that it could break. You know, what are your mitigation strategies? But that's where also I brought up audit and logging. logging and auditing is so important. So for example, if a hacker does come in and breach, one of the things on their processes is to remove that audit trail, you know, on a server, or what software are they using, you know, maybe delete a few things. And how do you prove that that's been deleted? How can you say that, you know, that it wasn't or was breached from you? And that's where you have to look at, say, audit logs and say, right, I have to make sure these audit logs are grabbed, everything done, every detail of a user, if it's been a user breach from someone's PC, or one of your staff, you know, spyware, or however it may have been breached, that everything is audited, logged, and also copied and thrown off somewhere where it's on a separate location that they can't get to. So if they do kind of destroy or you know, get to those logs, you have a method and proof to prove that, you know, you've done everything, you know, because nothing is fully secure. It only takes another bug or a 0 day or something like that to get out. So you know, making sure your auditing and logging is really good and backed up off elsewhere is one of your primary things, and then getting someone to assess that kind of software structure of what you're storing.
I was just going to follow up on that and to worry you even more. You might have seen in the press the case that involved Morrison's, the supermarket, where the company was held responsible for the illegal activities of one of its employees who breached let out the data on their customers. And so the company itself was responsible, even though they'd done nothing wrong.
And again, that's not, that auditing and logging is really important, not just from that, you know, guy sitting at his laptop with a blank screen, like everything like that. You can prove if maybe one of your staff members has inadvertently done something. Do you know what I mean? There's internal threats as well, not just like the guy sitting, or Russians kind of coming at you and doing everything like that. Do you know what I mean? So auditing is so important and often massively overlooked.
There's one other thing, that if you do have a data breach, then you need to do whatever you can to mitigate the circumstances so that you reduce the harm to any individuals.
And tell the ICO.
So that's your incident response policy. So if you are breached, you know, they would like to see what is your incident response. If you've got malware, if you've got something like that, if something, you know, the worst happens where it's got this. If you found out and you're able to forensically prove what's happened in a worst case scenario, either way with all these auditing logs, you know, they can see that you've been really diligent. You know, I mean, it's totally possible that they could get to the backup logs, you know, but I mean, that's a lot of work, a lot of effort and things like that. But you've done everything you physically can to understand these are my risks and this is how I'm mitigating them.
If you want follow-up details about today, if you want to find out more, or who, or how, or what, or why, then if we haven't got your details, your contact details, then do please give Natalie your contact details before you leave. The easiest way of doing that is by your business card, so drop your business cards in there. Just finally, we have a second sponsor today, that was NatWest Bank, and I'd now like to ask Andy Carpenter, who's the Regional Director for Business Banking, not quite the world now, it seems like that.
Thank you, Jerry. Right, I will be brief. Thank you very much. As I said, my name's Andy Carpenter. I'm the Director for Business Banking in Kingston and Sutton, around this area. And it always gets me excited when we come and work with the Chamber because they do such a fantastic job, Jerry and the team back there, I can see. Now, the thing is, we have over 3,000 business customers, SMEs, and we've been sort of starting to talk to them about GDPR at the moment. And it's quite an interesting response because there's a whole lot of ignore, forget, I'll put it away, it's not going to happen. So this is the message that we actually put out to them at the moment. So GDPR is real, so don't ignore it. It will start on the 25th of May, whether you're ready or not. So take advice and come to events like this. And if you listen to the experts, get good advice if you're not sure, come to events like this, use the Chamber, all the various speakers today, you will be absolutely fine. The fact that you're here today says something, that you care about your business and you don't want to be affected. So I hope you've enjoyed it. And they've guided you through the minefield. Another one for the self-employed person to look after. But all I do need to do is to do some thank yous. So first of all, Delia Porter from the Business Clan, thank you very much for your speech today. Paul Hudson of IQ in IT. And Patrick Stewart of TWM Solicitors. Also the Kingston University for the venue, Jerry, I'm guessing, so thank you. Ah, there you go. Yes, thank you very much. And lastly, to the usual suspects from the Kingston Chamber of Commerce, all up there. So it's Wanda, Amanda, Natalie, and obviously Jerry. Thank you very much for today. Thank you.